Oh, what did I need to press?
Don't worry, I did.
No, but I need to learn.
Learn next time.
Okay. Refreshing you.
Okay, I think you are actually, let's say, end stream. Get up. It says end stream. It shouldn't say. Get up. The stream somehow. So, you're live now.
What should I have clicked?
I don't know what you did click, so.
I clicked the one that you just did. I said upcoming event.
Don't worry, I don't believe you. No, you're broadcasting.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Is anybody there? What's that? Joe.
I don't.
Press the button. There you go. Look in there and see what you look like. Give it a minute. It's on delay.
Oh, I keep forgetting this is like, we don't really need it. In terms of camera. We're recording here. Here.
You're looking here. See, your lights are
I'm having a goofball.
pretty bright. You can probably get away with just sunlight. It's not even bright in here.
No, I don't like that. I don't
That's
like that.
because you're looking this way. If you don't know. Come back here.
That's fine. It's fine.
You know what? You do what you want.
It's really still pretty shitty, isn't it?
It's just gonna be natural. Oh, natural.
Oh, natural. Thank you so much.
This is how it is. Got your earphones in?
Hey,
It's your own power supply.
You're right. Thank you so much. All right. What'd you say?
So that 20 minutes before, schedule.
Huh. What are you doing? Good point, Sean. Good point. And I want to say on this happy Thursday, July 2nd, in the midst of COVID-19, early hello. I know I had mentioned 3 o'clock, but early hello, and it's great to see you. And thank you, Sean Stickle, for helping me get set up today. So I thought I had a pin here, but you know what? That's okay that I don't. So, do you have a lot of things on your mind? I have a lot of things on my mind. In the world of public speaking, fear, acknowledging fear, tackling fear, how to reduce the fear, to work through the fear, is on my mind today for the mentoring session, and as I'm looking out the window here with the wonderful, encouraging sunshine, I'm realizing just how prominent fear is to the good folks that I work with and have worked with over the years. And the question of, hey, Jill, how can I work with my fear? How can I get it to clam up? How can I get it to reduce? That can be posed to me as the speaker coach with a ton of anxiety, even in the question from the kind soul who wants help with their public speaking to myself. And depending on the level of comfort they have with their own speaking skill, depending on the goals they have with their audience, they can really bring a lot of desperation is too severe of a word, but whenever the issue of fear is brought forth by a lot of folks, whenever we talk to see where they want their growth to take shape, whenever fear comes up, a lot of times a sense of pensiveness starts out the conversation. And I really want to honor that, to be open to that, but look at the discussion from our casual, happy mentoring hour. Look at the discussion of fear from a few different angles. One being, there's a favorite story from a long time speechwriter who's helped a lot of presidential administrations on the conservative political end of the perspective, the conservative end of the political spectrum. I'm getting all my P's tripped up. Her name's Peggy Noonan, and I randomly get a kick out of Peggy Noonan and really studying her perspective of not just speech writing, but tackling fear and giving a speech. She's suffered a great deal from fear in public speaking, even though she was right in the heart of it as a speech writer. And if memory serves, I don't think she gave her first talk literally that she not only prepared herself but delivered directly to an audience. I think she was 40. Like, she was established in her humanhood, in her career, and I think she even had a emotionally traumatic experience when she was pretty young, maybe in junior high. It involved some mockery. Anyway, I give that background on Peggy Noonan to lead up to a comical story that regularly provides some refreshment to me from a teaching perspective about fear. I give that story because there can be so many origins or influences about fear, and they deserve patience, respect, but there are a few caveats that I want to get into a little bit later. So I'm about to dive into this story about Peggy Noonan and how she was recalling fear of someone that she was working with, I believe. There are many, many fantastic resources in the universe about growing as a speaker, as a speech writer, as a presenter. She wrote a book called On Speaking Well, and I, over the years, regularly refer to it in addition to other stellar, fantastic, enduring resources out there that I'm glad to talk about over another mentoring session. That might be a really good thing to dive into. Comical take on fear. So Peggy Noonan is going through in her book on Speaking Well about that moment that you agree to give a talk. You're invited. It's over a topic that you cherish, that you prize, that you want to fully uplift in the world. And your talk's weeks and weeks away. You're excited, you say yes. Time goes by. Tick, tick, tick. Time goes by. Tick, tick, tick. And then a few weeks away from the talk, your consciousness does a gigantic hiccup of panic, and you realize that the moment approacheth when you will be standing before an audience. Peggy Noonan is going through this. She's going through this story in her book. It might have been a hypothetical where she's trying to relate in words to that particular fearful moment. And she kind of crawls inside the would-be psyche of this speaker who's realizing critically, like in critical mass, that they need to get ready for their talk. And she starts brainstorming these catastrophes that seem much more accessible and reasonable to her versus actually diving into the fear of preparing. For instance, she said, you know what, I could just tell them that I can't do it. I could just tell them that I can't do it because I was in a car wreck. Well, and then in this story, she goes through a little bit of a rabbit hole of, gosh, but what if they pull the police reports and they realize that nothing was filed for any type of car wreck, and then they realize that I was lying, and that would be embarrassing. And she goes through these comedic what ifs of, gosh, maybe there could be a death in the family or some awful equivalent. No, that seems immoral to lie to that degree. And at this point, I'm riffing, but she really crawls into the nuance and the humanness of what that fear looks like when you really start staring a deadline in the face to get ready for a speech. And I love it because so many elements of the fear, even if they are dramatically too far-fetched, they strike a chord, and I really appreciate it. All right, so there's comedy. Then she says, somewhere close to that wonderful meandering story, she says, when the fear starts to click in regarding preparedness, achieving preparedness for a talk, that is the moment, the mind's moment of starting to care about what you're producing for an audience. That has stuck with me. Excuse me, I'm fighting off hiccups. That stuck with me for years and years in terms of that is the mental switch, and I find that that interpretation of fear, when it really starts to heighten when it's game time to get ready for a talk, I find that mental switch of interpretation of, hey, that's the point. Your sense of ownership is really starting to kick in, get energized, and to really wanting to assert something good, to build something of quality that can benefit your audience. That's the moment of care. So I really dig that a lot. I find that enduring. Okay, so let's take that potential interpretation or response to fear and set it over here for a second. What I really wanted to explore in our time together, in addition to unloading that wonderful Peggy Noonan moment about fear from her book on Speaking Well, if you ever get a second. It's great. It's really worth it. No matter where your politics lie, even though she comes from the conservative end of helping conservative presidents with their public speaking. She's really something as a speechwriter and knowing the nuts and bolts. All right. I want to dive in for a bit on 3 or 4 main issues surrounding fear of public speaking. And one of them is how the fear can be translated. And secondly, the second segment, the second chunk, I wanted to dive in to methods, to about 4 different methods that I've tested and shared with folks over the years on how to respond, how to interact with the fear. So I want to look at different interpretations and then different specific methods on working with the fear, whether it's mental or actual different types of practicum in working with the fear. So it's worth lifting up. It's really worth lifting up that when it comes to fear of public speaking, there are different translations of it, right? There is one ever common human primal translation, which is panic. Another, common psychological or sociological term over the years, the good old fight or flight. It is the panic, the internal adrenaline cue that threat is in the midst and you feel it in here. So panic is one way to translate fear in public speaking, how it can register here. Excuse me. And great, okay, so we're all good. I was just checking out another screen to make sure we're all copacetic and that I'm connecting with you properly. So panic, and then secondly, another translation of that fear is more physical, linguistic syndromes or disorders. A lot of times stutters that are detected in people, experienced in people, often are a byproduct of possible physical injury, but a lot of times there is a psychological root to stutters, and it can be heightened in the fear of, or heightened, from fear of speaking in public. You might have seen or read about, what's his name? It's a king, was the King of England who was the brother of the king who was to actually inherit leadership. Sorry, I'm getting all trippy on my history here. One of the brothers of British royalty in the 50s, maybe 40s, 50s. One of the brothers abdicated the throne so he could go marry someone that he absolutely wanted to marry, and I think her last name was possibly Wallace. And bottom line, that particular British brother, royal brother, abdicated his inheritance of the throne. So then the next brother inherited the throne, became the king, and that brother had a severe speaking stutter and had it since childhood. And so you may have seen The King's Speech. That was made into a movie, based on a very real historical story of his experience with his linguistic tutor, who I think had fantastic drama experience and working in or using drama as an art to help soldiers recover from PTSD. I think most of this is 80% accurate and 20% is me possibly being unintentionally creative with the facts. Anyway, the King's Speech is what I want to offer as a example of how an interpretation, a translation rather, of public speaking fear can occur more physically. And then there's good old aversion. Aversion can be a translation of fear, which a lot of these three can integrate, or meander. But when there is aversion to speak in public, 100%, when that is 100% how fear is translated, then an obvious but distinct consequence that I want to lift up whenever 100% aversion is occurring is zero experience occurs, right? If you're averting something, you absolutely don't want to dive into the experience. You're tactically choosing not to experience that which you are averting. And that is where the ultimate void of growth occurs. The void, the prevention of growth in articulation, obviously in speaking in public, but deepening in one's linguistic practice, externalizing, all of it. There's a wealth of oral communication that is absolutely denied from occurring. And whenever that level of growth, excuse me, I need to scooch back, whenever that level of growth discontinues, is stopped due to the aversion of the experience, the deeper experience of fear, I get concerned of that. So even though it's logical to talk about we avoid the thing which we fear, when it comes to public speaking and when aversion is regularly how we engage or do not engage fear of speaking in public, I do get concerned, because not only are we denying our linguistic systems, our engagement systems, the chance to concretely grow, but we are consciously or not limiting, I think, the strength of our ideas, because our ideas, whenever we risk sharing them, they have the chance to connect with other people's minds and to grow in allegiance, to grow in evolution, and thus the impact of philosophy and linguistic strength. We could talk forever about it. So now that we've lifted up different ways that that fear of speaking in public can be translated, I want to dive in to 4 concrete ways over the years that have been tested, and maybe you've heard or tried out some of these, but 4 concrete ways to work with the fear. And I'm tossing out 4 or different ways to engage this fear of public speaking, to ideally engage different types of learning styles and different types of capacity, because right now your potential fear of speaking in public could have a very strict capacity. It exists, the capacity exists, but it's technically a strict capacity on being able to confront it. And that's something to be honored. That's a starting place. So even if your capacity to confront your fear as a potential, public storyteller, public speaker, even if it's strict, it's still small, but it still exists. So there's that capacity versus possibly you may be over here with a larger willingness, a larger capacity to confront that fear. And so maybe another method might be appropriate at this stage in the game of your self-awareness and development. I may cough, I may not, you don't know. I'm trying to squelch it. Okay, so who knows? There may or may not be a cough involved in our conversation. How are we doing? Great? Okay, great. So the first method I want to toss out regarding how to grapple with fear is purely mental perception. I toss this out if you're at a point in your development where you're willing to try interpreting fear a different way and to move from absolute 100% aversion, like, oh, I'm afraid, I'm not doing it. Oh, I'm afraid, I'm not doing it. So the goal with this potential mental perception tactic is to move from responding to fear with 100% aversion to potentially interpreting mentally, not anything more tactically than that, but mentally trying to interpret, attempting to interpret fear in a different way. And that is, would you be willing to interpret fear when it comes to speaking in public as a source of energy? So let's say you and I were in a more private, direct coaching dynamic. And let's say as we were talking, maybe working on some exercises, let's say panic really started to kick in and you started to say, Jill, I'm just going to have to cancel my engagement. I'm going to call the audience right now. I'm going to call the conference planners. I'm going to call the planners who are hosting a summit on Zoom, whatever the venue, whatever the dynamic. Jill, I just can't do it. The panic is literally about to ooze out my face. I can barely stomach it. Let's say your panic was at that level. My response to you would do certainly some breathing exercises to help integrate physically some release of the panic just in the moment. And then I would ask repeatedly, just between us, would you be willing in this moment, say for 5 minutes, to keep talking just as we are, but whenever that panic starts to come up, we'll continue to breathe, we'll continue to talk, we'll continue to breathe, and also would you mentally interpret, just test this, interpret that panic feeling as a potential energy source. And there could be a part of you in that conversation that says, hey Jill, I think you're dumb, I reject that, I hate it. But if you and I were in a much more physically shared space where unless you absolutely ran out the door, you would have to stay there, you know what I'm saying, to complete our coaching session. Versus now, you could be tired of it and you can just, go somewhere else on the YouTubes and say, bye, Jill. But in that moment, I would invite you to work with that perception. Would you be willing? Would you be willing? And we would keep on going. So that is one mental perception tactic I would suggest in terms of greeting fear, the panic of public speaking, in a different way, to test seeing it as an energy source. Secondly, looking at using tactical linguistic response to fear. Now this next suggestion can be really helpful where, let's say you don't necessarily have a specific audience or a specific engagement planned, but your bucket list, you're working down your development goals, your bucket list is to engage fear in a more direct, growthful, non-averting way, all right? This is a favorite exercise I suggest, and it has a linguistic, objective and a very common beneficial outcome, and that is to choose a passage. I'm a sucker for speech history, so a lot of times I'll work with different excerpts from a favorite speaker, leader, legislator from the 70s, Barbara Jordan. She was the first Black individual, public voice, to open as a keynoter for a major political convention, the 1976 Democratic National Convention, and then she was pivotal in the House impeachment proceedings for President Nixon in, I believe, 74. So incredible mind and thinker. Anyway, I would choose a passage from a favorite speech, so I would suggest to you, choose a favorite passage, 4 to 5 sentences, super simple, and let yourself read this passage. I feel like I'm allowing my forehead just to fly off to the sky there. Read this passage at different articulation rates. Set your timer for 5 minutes and read it really fast, as if zero punctuation, completely articulate as if there was no tomorrow. The only goal is hyper speed. Do that for 5 minutes. Again, reset the timer for another 5 minutes. Read the same passage extremely lethargically. Very slow. And as you're reading the passage with this lethargic speed, at this lethargic pace, you'll notice that you'll be competing with your unspoken subtextual thoughts and the actual passage. You'll be reading so slow, you'll start noticing the inner criticisms, what I call them, like, oh my gosh, Jill is so ridiculous. Why are we doing this exercise? Because you're articulating so slow, you'll have enough mental capacity to have a dual registry of those inner funky thoughts. So start out incredibly speedy, zero acknowledgement of punctuation. 5 minutes. Next, super lethargically. Set it for a third time, another 5 minutes, and read it in your normal articulation rate. I lean toward doing this in 3 different sets, so 5 times 3. Ideally, if you can, completely sitting up. Ideally, if you can, even standing up to really engage physicality and to really help increase capacity to engage that linguistic adrenaline at different articulation rates. And what that can do is really help with linguistic disfluencies, the ever common ums and uhs, tripping over the ums and uhs. That's your, linguistic energy trying to catch up to your mind, and that can really help create, verbal stewardship and volume stewardship even though you're working with speed. It can really touch in terms of expanding capacity in those different arenas. It's fantastic. And then what it's also doing is creating a forum for you to engage heightened speaking adrenaline that 99% of the time, whenever you know there's an audience that you will engage, that adrenaline that you're feeling is interpreted as fear. So I really love this exercise when there's not a scheduled mandate, a scheduled program for you to engage an audience, because obviously it's more psychologically comfortable, but you, through your own volition, are creating a practice arena where different types of linguistic intensities and articulation rates are created. That is helpful in learning to manage fear as an energy source. That's helpful. All right, so that's like a more tactical linguistic option. We already talked about a perception-based option of, hey, could I perceive fear in this way, and test out perceiving it a different way versus completely caving into aversion and panic. All right. Thirdly, I want to get into an informal storytelling dynamic that's been a favorite method for years, a favorite response. And you may have heard of it called in many different ways. So a lot of folks who are midway through their careers, maybe just prior to that, and they're realizing more consciously what perspectives they really value about their career. I'm really struck these days by the hospitality industry, all gamuts of it, but specifically the hotel industry. I've done some work I've been so blessed to do with an association here in town who represents the hotel industry, which, as you know, likely has been severely hit hard by COVID-19, as has so many industries, and certainly the hospitality industry at large. But what I really love about informal storytelling as a potential response and healthy way to engage that fear and to learn how to manage and use that fear whenever speaking in public is because you can, what do I want to emphasize here? That you can invite trusted friends or peers and create an informal, scheduled though, make it intentional. Don't just say, hey, right now where you're free, schedule it a few times a month, invite a few friends. I'd probably start with 4 or 5. Invite them via Zoom. We're still in a sensitive COVID-19 dynamic, aren't we, when it comes to socializing? So invite them over Zoom and share about a prized topic that fascinates you. I've had the hotel industry on my mind a lot, and so I was thinking, hey, I could talk about the Willard Hotel and their fantastic history. I could do that as my informal storytelling salon. Bottom line, create an informal storytelling dynamic. The stakes are low. You're engaging with people that you trust, but you're talking about point of interest. Hey, 4 or 5 friends, can you please join me 10 days from now? We'll all have our favorite coffee and whipped cream, and let me share with you about my favorite XXXX. I'm just going to share stories and practice engaging the discomfort at that informal level, and that will again expand capacity whenever the stakes are for more formalized storytelling audiences. More public audiences than your buddies over Zoom. I really love doing that because there are some side self-stewardship benefits too, good old leadership growth as well. When it comes to fear of public speaking, it's so foundational, it's so common and human, and it is, and not to sound completely funky, but it is the thrill of a part of the thrill of learning to become a more present, even stronger engager of the fellow human being. It is a primal, it can be, recognizing fear and learning to work through it, build from it even, is a part of learning to confront something head on and use it ideally for a greater pattern of good. And that can get into another afternoon of pure philosophy, but that is what drives me about the gamut of shaping public speaking skill. That's fantastically ironic to trip on your own words saying the word public speaking. But being willing to acknowledge fear and the humanness of it, but being willing to look at it and to engage through it to get to the other side, where frankly, the other side may be there's still the presence of fear, which there will be, but with the fear is an expanded capacity of strength to engage it. And that is where the juice of relating through the power and the beauty of language comes from, between human to human to human. It's a beautiful thing. The fourth method is, so one thing to note about, creating your potential informal storytelling salon via screen on Zoom is that's creating an engaging dynamic, right? It's a two-way street. You'll have eyeball-to-eyeball contact with your buddies, with your trusted peers as you're building up that informal storytelling and practice forum. Okay, this next suggestion, this next method is to create, again, an informal storytelling dynamic, but one way through video. There have been clients where they would be really trying to grapple, acknowledge, and test different ways to work through their fears and to better use them as storytellers, as speakers. And I would suggest a video blog, and for them to choose different topics to share, literally mini snippets, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and to regularly publish even if it was really uncomfortable, but to use that as a forum. And you know what? A few of them years ago said, Jill, I can see the utility. I just can't quite stomach it. Could we do something else? And I gently pushed back because I do believe in the educational power a lot. There's a lot of utility in video as a educational form for public speaking, as you can imagine, let alone connecting with humanity and all the other benefits of video in our social sphere. But I came back to folks who have been resistant to a public video blog and said, what if you did even a private or unlisted video blog on YouTube and then share it with me as your coach, and I can offer affirmation and sharing and affirmation and sharing. What if you did a video blog in that capacity? And they went for it. So they were able to, again, meet their fear, be straight up honest with it, but still use it as a launching pad to practice articulation, practice working with ideas, their favorite travel places, their favorite pieces of art, their pets, their family that they love, anything, their favorite comedian, their favorite comedian, anything, their favorite poets, authors, anything on that video blog. And for a while, they would keep it unlisted. They would share it with me so I could help lift and affirm and offer guidance, lift, affirm. Affirmation's a big thing when you're trying to greet fear with a greater sense of capacity and fortitude. And then eventually they made their unlisted video blogs public. And so that was what that video option started out as a one-way level of engagement where they were engaging with, the audience of their own sense of determination versus anyone external, outside of myself, but still I wasn't there live time. They would have to record it and share it with me as their coach. And so I offer that video one-way option of creating an informal storytelling dynamic, either straight up start out unlisted, but still really to give yourself a consistent forum of practicing externalizing ideas and engaging the natural physical linguistic adrenaline that can come through that whenever you're declaring to your own willpower that it's game time to assert your growth. So, recap on the 4 favorite methods of not only acknowledging fear of speaking in public, but 4 methods to try depending on where your comfort level is. 1, to just practice perceiving fear as a source of energy. And again, whenever you feel that panic, and let's assume for a second that you're not, 5 minutes away from walking out on stage, that can be an expanded, more directed, even physical preparation method to deal with that particular type of fear. My short-term response is breathe and punch like a boxer, but that more physical in the moment fear, we can look at a different time. But in terms of tackling in an ongoing manner your fear and learning how to see it, be with it, and move on through it, and eventually use it to be even more present and engaged with your audience. 1, practice seeing it whenever the panic hits instead of immediately translating it as a threat. You might feel yourself lock up. Okay, be with the locking, and then train yourself to respond with, could I perceive fear as a potential energy source? And then keep on breathing. And just be with that question, even if it frustrates you or may seem a little bit abstract, because it's helping you get your mind into a little bit more of a curious place in response to the panic versus getting locked and swallowed in the panic. And it's that swallowing that creates overall aversion to growth, correct? So just be with it that way. So that's a mental response. And then secondly, look at good old linguistic tactics and practice getting a favorite passage, 5 sentences, and asserting different articulation rates in reading those passages. Super fast, super fast, without any sense of punctuation. Then super lethargic with excessive pauses in between words. So read the passage that slow, again, 5 minutes each segment, and then for the 3rd segment, set the timer for 5 minutes again and read your normal articulation pace as if you were reading to your child's class on Zoom. I've heard that. Parents have been doing that a lot, like reading to their child's fellow students on Zoom, and it's been neat, like a kindergarten reading hour type of thing. Anyway, so practice those 3 sets, ideally times 3 to 5 additional sets of repetition. So that's tactical linguistics that can help engage that source of vulnerable panic, and it has different byproducts. A biggie also of helping with control and synthesize the linguistic disfluencies of us, ums. Okay, and number 3, set up your informal storytelling salon on Zoom. A few trusted peers, a few times a month, literally 10 or 15 minutes, unless you want to do a flat 30 minutes and do chit-chat socializing after you share, but open your informal storytelling salon with, hey, talking about a favorite topic and really disciplining yourself to, physically engage, sit on the edge of your seat, talk directly to the screen, and practice externalizing good old ideas and topics that engage you intellectually, and just practice in that forum where the stakes are low, and learn to engage that type of attentive energy when speaking. And then 4th, we just gabbed about it, an informal video blog, and either keep it unlisted, and if you do keep it unlisted, ideally share it with a friend to have just a little bit of ownership of relating to others through ideas, even though it'll be after the fact and not, in the moment engagement. Or, of course, you can take that video blog and publish it and share it with friends, which is neat. The more practice you get, you'll have an expanded, shareable, informal portfolio of you sharing ideas that you prize and really like to stand upon and assert. It's great. So those are 4 methods that I toss out to respond to fear in more productive, ideally growthful ways. Again, with a sense of honor. Every human has a sense of heightened awareness, and to a degree, fear when they're engaging others. It just gets down to making that fear more manageable and usable in different dynamics, and ultimately getting far, far, far away from the interpretation of fear that is pure aversion, where you're averting opportunities to grow and engage through externalized ideas. That's the goal, is to get away from that confining aversion that stops growth. Before signing off, how are we? Oh, good. We're doing good on time. Before signing off, I do want to say, regarding good old fear of public speaking, I do want to offer with great respect and gentleness that if we can summon ourselves to look at the fear and to be with it, there can be revealing layers in our fear regarding public speaking. I've met wonderful souls who were afraid and hadn't thought about some sort of traumatic mockery that occurred from when they were young kids. And that was a real, subconscious fuel to their present adult anxiety and panic regarding public speaking. So even if there are certain memories that aren't conscious to you, even just being with the fear and not running from it whenever you're just envisioning going before an audience, just not running from that disoriented panic, can lead to just enough of a mental shift where the mind, especially with a coach, a patient, tenacious coach, can cause you to see what that fear can reveal educationally. So if you're open to it, fear can reveal ways that we can ultimately shape our voice and our sense of self to be much more resourceful to people, where we can help make our path to grow as public voices. However the definition of public takes shape, it doesn't have to be vast seas of audiences. The public is the public, and that could be a few different people that we have the great opportunity to honor. So fear can be revealing, and it can be used as a tool for our voice's greater pattern of good, and that's exciting, Have a great day, and thank you for being here. I hope two things. I hope you will subscribe to this good old live chat, public speaking mentoring chat that will occur every Thursday at 3 o'clock. That's what I'm going for. My blog is over at liveyourtalk.com. I would love to engage with you there, or certainly on the good old Twitter. I'm Jill Foster on Twitter. Would love it if you subscribed. You're always welcome here every Thursday at 3 o'clock. And between now and forever, I hope you are surrounded by the solace and beautiful utility of our language every step of the way.